Good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome. Hi, everyone. My name is Teresa Soto. I am the Ruth R. Martyr Director of Learning and Community Engagement here at the Walters Art Museum. Thank you all so much for coming out to today's conversation with the inspiring father-daughter powerhouse that is Getachew and Helina Metaferia. I've personally been looking forward to this program for months, and I'm so glad to see so many of you here. I know we have stiff competition with the Ravens game today. Go Ravens! I'm so happy to welcome you all here, and I wanted to start by sharing our land acknowledgement. At the Walters, we believe it is important to understand the histories that have led us to the present and to acknowledge the people who came before us. So we begin our public programs with our Indigenous land and cultural heritage acknowledgement. The Walters Art Museum acknowledges the Piscataway and the Susquehannock nations that originally inhabited this land. We also acknowledge tribal nations, most notably the Lumbee, who migrated here, and Indigenous peoples whose ancestors are represented in the objects we steward in our collection. In today's program, we bring together two esteemed professors who are also a father and daughter, a scholar of political science, Getachew Metaferia, and an artist, Helina Metaferia. Through this dynamic pairing, we explore art and politics, history and contemporary times, family and culture, first generation and second generation, and Ethiopia and the Ethiopian diaspora in the United States. This program offers an excellent representation of the myriad intersections and connections that are explored in the Ethiopia at the Crossroads exhibition, on view here at the Walters until March 3rd, which is just around the corner. We only have this show for a little over a month, so please do spend some time with this important exhibition. Ethiopia at the Crossroads was curated by my brilliant colleague, Christine Sciacca, Curator of European Art from 300 to 1400 CE, who I have the pleasure of introducing. I've been fortunate to work with Christine for many, many years here at the Walters, and also several years ago, we worked together at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles. I recall over a decade ago being captivated by Christine talking about an Ethiopian manuscript at the Getty Museum. And now, many years of research and planning later, I get to be captivated, as we all do, by several centuries of Ethiopian art in a stunning, large-scale exhibition. As the Washington Post declared, finally, a sweeping look at Ethiopian art. Thank you, Christine, for your incredible work and for providing a foundation for the multifaceted discussion that has brought all of us here today. Please join me in welcoming Christine, who will be introducing our guest speakers.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Teresa. Can you all hear me? Yes. I tend to project, so if I start to get too loud with the mic, just go, stop. And thank you all for joining us here today on what should be a very, very special event. I too have been looking into this. I've been sort of looking forward to this, talking about it on any tours that I give of the Ethiopia at the Crossroads exhibition. I hear there's some sort of sport game thing happening downtown. So thank you all for spending part of your afternoon with us today. I think you'll really enjoy it. I also wanted to mention that towards the end of the program, actually during the program, we will have some of my colleagues walking through, passing out forms if you'd like to submit a question, and then towards the end, we'll collect those questions, and I will read them out and field them to our esteemed guests today. So with that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce both of our speakers. Helina Metaferia is an interdisciplinary artist working across collage, assemblage, video, performance, and social engagement. Metaferia received her MFA from Tufts University's School of the Museum of Fine Arts and attended Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. And I should note she's also a graduate of Morgan State University right here in Baltimore. Woohoo! Her work was included in the 2023 Sharjah Biennial in the United Arab Emirates, that was just last year, and she has also held solo exhibitions at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, which I had the great pleasure of seeing personally, and the RISD Art Museum in Providence, Rhode Island. also at the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. I'm a former LA girl, so San Francisco. Metaferia is also assistant professor at Brown University in the visual art department and lives and works in New York City. And if you have not seen the Ethiopia at the Crossroads exhibition, we had the great pleasure of including 2 of Helina's works from the Headdresses series, which she'll talk about today, in the exhibition, which is just outside that top door. So please don't miss that. I first encountered Helina actually through our curatorial files here at the Walters Art Museum because as it turns out, Helina was an intern here many years ago. And as she'll tell you, and she's told me, she is very much, part of her practice is really to, it's very research-based. And so she actually researched our collection, our Ethiopian collection. We have one of the largest collections of Ethiopian art outside of Ethiopia here at the Walters. And so she researched that collection. Her work is in our files. And so I was already using it before I had even met her in person. But thankfully, I did meet her in person through our former colleague, Alexander Jarman, who was our manager of adult and community programs back in the day. And I remember walking with Alexander and Helina through our Ethiopian gallery on the 3rd floor of this building, and sort of talking about how all of that historical art impacted her work, what she drew from it. And towards the end, I remember her saying, you know, you really should meet my father. And so that brings me, of course, to Dr. Getachew. Getachew Metaferia is professor of political science at Morgan State University, where he has taught since 1995. Having grown up during a tumultuous time in Ethiopia in the 1960s, he was inspired to pursue the field of political science and studied in the United States. He completed a BA at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, an MA at the University of New Orleans, and a Ph.D. here in our very own area at Howard University in Washington. Also, woo, woo. He was a Fulbright Fellow and as a senior scholar at Tel Aviv University in 2018, where I remember us corresponding about your essay for the catalog when you were over there. In addition, he has been a Fulbright-Hays Fellow in Namibia, Myanmar, Thailand, China, and Peru. Now, this is Crossroads, people. This is really Crossroads. Dr. Metaferia has authored numerous books, articles, and book chapters, including Ethiopia and the United States, History, Diplomacy, and Analysis, published in 2009. In 2021, he contributed a chapter to the book Reflections on Exile, African Scholars and Intellectuals in North America. And his current research is focused on the Beta Israel, or Ethiopian Jews. So, conclusion to the story is I did reach out to Dr. Getachew, and he kindly agreed to be part of my scholarly advisory committee for the exhibition. This is really important for me to bring many voices into what you see in the galleries, what you see in the catalogs. And over a series of meetings that we had with this group, he brought many incredible insights and really kind of gave us the bigger picture of Ethiopia. For many of us who work on the Middle Ages like myself, he really brought me up to the present day. So I'll be always grateful for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that I'm sure many people here know Dr. Getachew, and he's also an incredibly lovely man. So I think you all know that. So it's great to be working with him. And if you can't get enough of Dr. Getachew here on the stage, you can go into the Ethiopia exhibition and see his face and hear his voice on a screen that we have in there with him talking about the Battle of Adwa. It's the last video in the exhibition, so please don't miss that. With that, I would like to kick off the discussion between Getachew and Helina, because you don't want to hear any more from me, you're here to hear them. And I should mention this is their first time together on stage. I'm so pleased that I see everyone's waving. We all know these people. This is great. But I can't believe this is the first time they really had a conversation about the impact of Ethiopia on their art and their work. And so to start us off, I was just hoping that you both could tell us a little bit about what your work is, and also how you incorporate connections to Ethiopian art and culture. And you have the clicker, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Christine. Thank you for all of you coming here this afternoon. As I said, as Dr. Christine said, I'm professor of political science and I teach international relations between states, nations. And then in this, I also teach about globalization, the convergence of societies, countries, market, trade, and all of this. So the theme of this museum today is Ethiopia as the Crossroads. That relates to international relations. Ethiopia is known to be a focal point for countries as far as Persia, today's Iran, the Byzantine, the Roman, and then from the African side, the Nubian, the Nile Valley civilization, Egypt. So from all of this part of the world, spanning thousands of years, they converged on Ethiopia. They brought to them their cultures, their values, their traditions, their languages. And then here, converging in Ethiopia, an amalgamation of cultures and values. The Ethiopians learned from them. And you know what they did? They made these cultures and values Ethiopianized. They made it Ethiopian. For example, you know of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, Tawahedo Church. Before Christianity was introduced to Ethiopia, in the books that Christine and this museum published, a voluminous one, you can get it here, Ethiopia followed the Jewish religion. The Kibra Negast, the 14th century, the glory of the kings, talks about Queen Sheba going to Jerusalem to visit King Solomon, learn from his wisdom, and maybe challenge him as well. So she adopted Judaism from there, and she told him, "Your God is my God," converted to Jerusalem. And she had beautiful Ethiopian woman, African woman, and a beautiful Middle Easterner, King Solomon. Maybe they fell in love, but coming back to Ethiopia, Aksum at that time, she gave a birth to a son called Menelik the First. He was very inquisitive about his father. And when he was 13, he went to Jerusalem to visit his father. Stayed there for about 3 years. And coming back to Ethiopia, he brought with him the firstborn sons of the 12 tribes of Judah, Jerusalem. They brought with them Judaism. And Judaism became the religion of the land. And then they brought with them the Ark of the Covenant, on which Moses wrote the Ten Commandments. And that still exists in Ethiopia. So this is a convergence of cultures and values, cross-section. So they internalized it and made it Ethiopian. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Later on, Christianity were introduced. 4th century, King Izana became Christian. So tolerance and all of this came about. International relations, what we call international relations, convergence of cultures in societies. Later on, for the first time, I mean, outside of Saudi Arabia, Islam was introduced to Ethiopia. The three Abrahamic religions lived side by side. A sense of tolerance, which we don't see now because of this polarization, bloodshed, and all of those things. So this is the way I look at it and analyze it from a political scientist perspective. That's what you call the cross-section. You know? Ethiopia as a cross-section. You know? So that is what Ethiopia is all about. And this is what you're going to see and look and internalize and analyze when you go through this museum. I think that basically talks about my ties, my work to this, the theme of the museum here. Thank you very much.
So now you see where I get a lot of information from and influence in my work. I am so honored to be here with you all and to share this platform. Thank you, Christine. Thank you for the Walters to return after many years from being curatorial intern to an artist exhibiting. That was actually the little dream I had when I was at Morgan State. It's such an honor because as I was working in the curatorial archive, I was thinking, I am not a curator. No offense to those who are. You know, it just wasn't for me, the cubicle life at the time, but I knew I wanted to make art, and I knew I wanted it to be in those institutions. And so now, the very works that I was studying and had such an impact on my work when I was an undergraduate student at Morgan is what I'm working with in themes of my practice, but also what I'm showing next to in this exhibit, so thank you. So informed a lot by an upbringing, both by my esteemed father here on stage and my wonderful mother, my Getachew Metaferia, may she rest in peace. She passed away 2016, and we have tissue on stage just in case we need it. But, you know, thank you. A hardcore love of Ethiopia. That is what I grew up with. And they will tell you more about their upbringing, or my father will, but you know, came before the 1974 revolution. And so I had that inkling and that seed of Ethiopia that was before what was called the Red Terror time. All this history I was downloading since I was a young kid. And it was, I wouldn't say romanticized, but it was a beautiful memory. What they call in Amharic tizita, means memory, of this past of Ethiopia. And so I was inspired by that. And over time, my work did not turn into traditional scholarship, although I teach in the academy. I'm much more interested in image and the power of image and the power that things beyond words can give and hopefully can impact change. My work is definitely inspired by Ethiopian culture, but I'm a first generation born in Washington, D.C. American person. So very much informed by American histories and the intersection of both. And that wasn't a conflict for me because I grew up in a household where that was talked about very freely. My father teaching at a historically black college, my mother also taught at UDC. And I see very fluidly how one movement, one revolutionary movement can intersect and inspire another, as it has done through history. I live in Harlem in New York City, and I remember stories my dad would share, which is in his writings, about how Harlemites in the 1920s or 30s would sign up to enlist in the war against the Italians because they were very inspired by this anti-colonial movement that was happening in Ethiopia. So those are the kinds of stories I was hearing. And some people look at my work and they say, well, you work with American bodies and people and social practice engagement in American communities or intersectional communities, as I call it. And I say, yeah, I don't see any challenge in that, because when I collage with images from civil rights images or Black Panther newspapers from archives that I research from the 1960s, I see influence that it has received from the Haitian Revolution, that it has received from movements all over Africa, and how one movement inspires the other through this sort of shared history is what I'm interested in. My work spans across many disciplines. I work very interdisciplinary. I work in time-based movement, like performance art, and I work in visual arts, like collage and tapestries and sculpture. I work mostly inside of museums and in gallery systems, but I also do public art and interventions in public space through performance. Some of my work is much more iconic, and the icons are definitely adapted from my learnings of Ethiopian art at a young age, especially with this curatorial internship that I had. And then other iconic gestures and symbols and movements that I've researched throughout. And all of the archives that are embedded in my work are all scanned and sourced from libraries around the country and internationally. Librarians are my biggest accomplice. That's how I always say it. They hold the archive. But I'm also critiquing the archive. And I'm not saying that it's perfect. I'm saying oftentimes I focus on women's issues, mostly because I grew up in a very feminist household where feminism wasn't a dirty word at all. My mother is an astute feminist, but also because I believe women's legacies and labor were very overlooked in these social movements, that they contributed, but that was not always what was described and talked about. So that is the span of my work. It may look different and feel different. I'll land on this last slide here. This is a performance that I participated, or that I did for my solo show at Prey Shadows Gallery in 2022. And it is the action of me telling the stories of 5 generations of women in my family who, in some ways or another, have contributed to social change at their time in their respective countries. And I'm adorning my niece, Sela Diaz, who's here with us. And she receives these stories and receives the archives as embodied tapestries, but also a crown. So that sums up my practice.
So, Helina, I should just not even be here because you segued very well into my next question, which is to ask you both to sort of think back to your origins and to think about your childhood, your family story. How do we get from there to here, and how did that impact your work today? And let's start.
I'll go start with I want to hear this from my dad. So.
I don't know you for the moment. Basically, we are all children of our time, children of our period, our epoch. So the time we're born in influences us, makes who we are, our persona. So I'm a child of the Cold War era, the 1960s. This tug of war between the East and the West. Of course, Cold War between the East and the West, but in actuality, it was a hot war in Africa and in other countries. Seeing that, and then this movement in Africa and in other countries for independence, for being their own leaders, their own people in their own countries. That influenced me. This was a clarion call for the later independence of African countries. That movement influenced me. I am sure some of you who are here were also influenced by the situation of that time, the Cold War period. And then listening to radio at that time in Ethiopia, reading newspaper or papers, the civil rights movement in the United States, this fight, struggle, the urge to have equality, human dignity, that also influenced me. In Ethiopia, just like American students did here, we marched against the fight in Vietnam. This influenced me. So it shaped me. My outlook is based on that. It influenced my work, in my writings, in my outlooks, in the way I analyze things. So what I am today, I got not only from my family, I got it from the time that surrounded me at that time. It influenced me. I am sure that all of you in this will see eye to eye, we agree, because we are a product of those things. So I think this is what influenced me. From my home, from values of my family, and we are also children of the environment, the situation. That legacy is instilled in me. When I read newspaper, I look at it from that perspective, in my writings, in my analysis, in my expression, and that is what made me who I am. Thank you. Thank you.
What influenced me? Everything he just said is what I learned. His perspective.
I said you don't know me.
Well, I'm really big on oral histories and conversational art and dialogical art. This is what the social practice professor says, like these code words, these academic words, but really just the storytelling that happens in living rooms and kitchen tables. That is how I grew up, with my aunties and my family, who really shaped, and I learned Ethiopia through them. I didn't go to Ethiopia until I was 13 years old. So I went a whole of 5 times in my life, no more than a 3-month summer vacation. And so a lot of what I know about Ethiopia is oral history, oral stories, and not the formal stuff, not the stuff that you read about, but the conversational stuff, like the survival stuff you learn about, just from woman to woman, or from my father, or from, just about how they endured as immigrants coming to this country and learning a new country. And then simultaneously, I had an American influence, obviously, because that is how I identify and that is what I know. So I had two cultures. And if anybody in here is a first-generation American person, or came here when they were very young, you understand that it is a dance between cultures. And so that is what my work addresses and my art. That is what I know to be true. I'm probably one of the first-generation Ethiopians, because now there's a lot more younger people. But I'm kind of one of those first. There wasn't a lot of people to look to, other than my cousins, or that could identify with what we were going through, because we were the first wave of that. My dad was part of the first wave of Ethiopian immigrants to come in, and so we're the first wave of people born here. So simultaneously, I'm learning in the household and outside of the household and making sense of those two things. And that is how my work kind of grapples with those things. I'm very influenced by the iconography of the Black is Beautiful 1970s sort of aesthetic that you can probably see in my art. The pride of Ethiopia is one thing that I learned and ingested, because for better or for worse, we have a lot, and from the history that we have. But it allowed me to hold my head up in a certain kind of way, in which obviously in my art, I'm encouraging the younger people and the people around me of all backgrounds to hold themselves up, especially the women identifying folk. And so those are the kinds of inklings. And a full shout out now to my mother. Yes, thank you. Dr. Maiganet Shifarao, who is not here with us today, but could have had another seat with us if she was here, because this woman, let me just tell you, and I will do my best, but the tissues are here. She was strong in so many ways, but very, I would say very, she held herself very respectfully, and she didn't have an in-your-face personality. She was a great listener, an incredible academic. I learned about her teaching. I learned so much from her teaching skills about listening and just the power of listening. She wrote this book, which we published as a family posthumously, because she was in the middle of. She pretty much finished writing it, and my dad helped to make sure that would get out in the world. But during the time of her passing, she wrote this book, Struggle from Afar, Ethiopian Women, Peace, and Human Rights Activists in the Diaspora. It is about the work that she'd been doing since the 1970s to present day on behalf of Ethiopian women as an expat. And she was the president of CREW, which is, I need to get all the acronyms right, CREW, Center for Research of Ethiopian Women, I believe. In case one of the aunties are here, I don't want them to be mad at me. Oh, sorry, I might have left something out, but.
Center for the Rights of
Ethiopian Women, okay. And they did so much work on, to give you some examples, helping to free Ethiopian women political prisoners, working on behalf of those who labored in the Middle East unfairly, human trafficking, things like that, these kinds of issues. It's still a very active organization. So this basically, and it has some kind of reference to me as a baby watching them do these things, but there's a lot of great information. We are selling this book as a fundraiser. At the end of this, you're welcome to buy it at the reception desk. It's $20. All proceeds go to a fellowship in her name to help other Ethiopian women research these issues and to start small businesses in Ethiopia. So that was my shameless plug. But she was a big influence and still is. And the whole By Way of Revolution series, which all the art that you saw here, all of this work came from when, after she passed, it was my way of grieving and celebrating overlooked labor of women activists. Why? Because I knew the legacy isn't always archived. And this is, my mother was in the middle of writing her archive, making sure this story, this testimony was out there. And we made sure that that was out there. But there's so many women who've participated from civil rights movements to, all type of social justice movements. Today, most of the leaders of Black protest movements are women-led, or women and non-binary folk-led. So I just want to put that out there, that was the genealogy. And the show that I had at the MFA Boston's Generations was very much about the sort of passing of the baton of that lineage. And I will pass that forward, as I said, to nieces and nephews, and also to students and to community.
I'm not choked up yet, but we're getting there. Okay. So you both have touched upon this a little bit, but we have two different generations. We have born in two different countries. How do you think that shapes your work differently? And is there some common ground between those two places and times?
For you.
Oh, okay. I just said a lot, so. I would say I very much am influenced by the values that my household had in my household, but I feel like it's an extension of Ethiopian culture. And some of those values are community. We are very family-oriented people. We are very communal people. We eat on one tray. If you've ever had Ethiopian food, I encourage you to check out Dukum locally or some other place where you can get some good food. We eat together, and it is, I learned how to share, if that makes sense. Like, I learned how to be generous because that is our wealth. We may not, as a country, we may not have a ton, comparatively to other countries, but we have so much wealth in love. And so I learned how to love from my family. I learned how to love from my culture and my community. And as an academic, let me tell you, that is very rigorous. To love in the face of the state of the world as it is today, whew, is a lot. But as an artist, I was never market-driven, or, I'm not trying to make the hottest thing that's gonna sell, but, my work is very dense, it's very political, and so I stick to those sort of values because it has been a method for survival for my family, our community, most immigrant communities, most people on this earth, that to have those sort of basic values of generosity, love, forgiveness, those are the things that really hold me and bind me. And generationally, that is again, this is an oral tradition. This is what was passed down from my tradition. Now, I might be a little bit better with technology, or I might have a little bit of savviness on the social medias, things that maybe my generation has integrated, but I try to keep those things in mind.
Great, thank you.
Well, if I correctly understand your question, the generational impact.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, each generation has its own problems and opportunities that emerged from the time. So each generation has a way to handle it, to overcome, to succeed. So the issues and problems I faced during my generation in the area I was born is very different from the generation of Helena's. Their issues, their concerns is very different from mine. Maybe in my case, in our case, it might be a generation that is struggling for survival, scarcities, and all of those things. The issues of that time was very different. So we had to cope up with things. The name of the game is do it or die, swim or sing. For this generation, it's a new issue, a new problem that we never faced. We never thought at that time about climate change, how it affects us. We never imagined about this globalization that affects us in one way or the other. Some benefit and some don't. We never thought about this global terrorism and all of those things. As our time, it was a struggle to maintain, in Ethiopian case, to maintain our independence, to practice freely our religion and all of those things, which now is facing some challenges. So these are the things that we are facing. And born in different political system here in the United States, there is a degree of liberty, freedom, where in my case we didn't experience that during the monarchy. So anyway, these are different things. Different generations face different problems and different skills and modalities to tackle these problems and overcome and make themselves. All of them added together, they have one thing in common. All generations struggle to survive, struggle to make it in one way or the other. And again, that is the name of the game yesterday, today, and that will stay until tomorrow. Thank you.
So I do have one final question. You'll see it's a bit self-serving, but while I am asking that question, I ask you to submit your very final questions on those slips of paper, and then they'll be delivered to me, and we'll do a little Q&A if you both are willing at the end. So while that is happening, my question for both of you is, I know you both have spent some time in Ethiopia at the Crossroads exhibition, and there are 225 objects, and I know what my favorites are, but I think we would all love to hear, what do you gravitate to in the exhibition? What makes you stop and think and have spent some time with? You can say her work, it's okay. She can't, so you can.
Well, I think I can take a shot at that. Mm-hmm. I tend to appreciate the medieval Ethiopian art. Because I identify with it. In a small way, I know how they drew these arts and then these icons and all of those things. It's not an easy task. It's time-consuming to produce these arts, ancient arts, 1,700 years back, and all of those. Yeah. No? So, to do those things, these artists have to blend different plants, different colors, mix them to produce the ink that they use. It's not easy going from place to place hunting for different colors and all of those. And then the process of producing parchment from the goat skin, shaving it, drying it, and all of this. Last time consuming and very laborious. So I can see the efforts, time taking, very taxing. And then sharpening bamboos in different shapes, different sizes, to use as pen, dipping into ink and writing all those. And then finally binding these books. You know? Sturdy, that had been in existence for the last 1,700 years. That is, it's very magnificent. And then, not only binding them, painstakingly writing. Look at the calligraphies they produced. Awe-inspiring. So I think I will tilt to the medieval. But I don't want to cross swords with Helina. I also appreciate the diasporic arts, those who in the diaspora. Mind you, they did not miss their Ethiopian trace, their African trace, their Pan-African trace. You know? Not only that, from what they see at the moment, they also imbibed this in their art and make it current. Just like the medieval art, these modern diasporic arts also speak to us. So in their own way, they are expressing what they see in the society, their frustrations and their hopes for the future. So I think all said, all of them are very fantastic, and you have to see all of them. They take time, and it is worth it. So basically, I would say amen to both the ancient and the modern. Thank you. Thank you.
So I was most influenced by the Ethiopian healing scrolls when I was an intern here years ago. And that had really sat with me, the fact that art can be visual and also ritualistic at the same time, that it can be a visual medicine, as a lot of the script that's written about it says. And I love that as a concept. So actually, at the Center for Book Arts later this year, I'm producing a risograph healing scroll much more literally. But all of my work, from the manuscripts, Ethiopian manuscripts, to the brass crowns, to like, all of it has that sort of iconic motif in the work, and also this idea of visual medicine. And for me, I'm not a trained priestess, or these are people who have a lot of spiritual training to make these works. But I am a concerned human citizen living in the 21st century. And if I could heal anything, it would be issues of social justice and social change, and can we, as a human, on a very human level, coexist and work with this planet. And so those are the things I'm concerned about. So the healing in my work, for me, has always been about humanity and the state of humanity and our ability to coexist and to be in right relationship with each other, authentic levels of integrity with each other, but also with the planet. So that being said, that's my favorite. I will say, shout out to the contemporary artists in the exhibit, which we are 10, and this is not a feud between the Metaferias over what's best or what's worse. But the function of art has changed over years, and this is true of every culture. So we're looking at medieval art, which had usually it was either patroned by very wealthy people, which still kind of sometimes happens today, but it was patroned for the elite, for government institutions, or for religious sectors, and that was really where you saw art across Europe and Africa. And in Africa, it was always functional, right? Like there was West African Mass, or and all of these works are functionally used, which was a challenge for me when I was working with the exhibition as a young person. I was like, wait, this is the stuff I see at church, and now it's in the museum. So I was trying to rectify that. Contemporary art, completely different. My role as an artist is to probe society. What? To have free will and free speech, and to think freely, and to question, and to take a stance outside of society, but critique it. Like this, it's changed. I mean, this is hundreds of years evolution. So shouting out the contemporary artists who are doing that work, but still also, whether that's conceptual art, the Getachew video piece, which is beautiful, comes to mind, or if it's artists like Faith Ringgold, love Faith Ringgold, and I'm so happy she's in the exhibition, as an African-American elder artist looking towards Ethiopia as, symbolic, right? As a symbolic piece right there. Or I'm thinking of Ida Mulene, who actually curated me into my first show when I was 18 years old. So Ida was a big part of why I'm an artist to this day. And her photographies and looking at, like the ways in which the face painting and those sort of more traditional motifs can be altered and changed. And then a lot of her work, from what I understand, is about climate issues, right? And embodying sort of these gestures around that. So we have such a scope, but it's so good that this exhibition is doing what it's doing, and it's traveling, and there's cataloged so beautifully, because it's record that we are, as a culture, are not just evolving like the rest of the planet is, but we haven't lost our sort of the parts of our culture, even now that we're spread all around the planet, as most diasporic communities are. There's still a trace. And you can find it if you look. But yeah, the contemporary artist role is just so different. So it's just, it's beautiful to see it all come together.
So I have a lot of questions here. We will not be able to get through them all in the next 10 minutes, but I'll throw a few your way. Are there Aboriginal Ethiopians whose culture and livelihood were decimated through conquest? Dun, dun, dun. Yes, that's a big one.
Well, all Ethiopians are Aboriginal.
Yeah.
They are indigenous. Maybe the migration isn't within Africa. Because of the geopolitics and because of the geographic situation, there is also cross-Mediterranean movement. And during the Christian era, as well as during the Jewish era, the proximity between Ethiopia and Jerusalem, they used to travel to these places. But they had been in Ethiopia, but there have been social migration. They are not stable. There have been people moving. In the case of Ethiopia, because of this geographic place situation, we have seen going across the Mediterranean. Mind you, Ethiopia has its diplomatic relations with the Portuguese and with Italians going back to the 14th century. So talking about the dissemination of the indigenous people, maybe certain languages have died. We have seen that in France. We have seen that in most parts of the world. Because the population of that language, specific language speakers might eventually decline, or it might be overtaken by a more dominant language, which becomes a lingua franca of that society. But as such, I don't remember, I've not heard about the complete dislocation or the complete demise of a culture, an indigenous people. First of all of them are indigenous, but have not read. Maybe cultures have been overtaken by others, dominant cultures, specifically the Ethiopian case. There have been shifts from the southern part of Ethiopia, from Oromia to the north, and from the north to the south. So there have been this intermarriage, intercultural exchange, hybridization of the culture and the society. Maybe I can see enriching. In that process, I can understand, I have not read, I can understand when analyze it, maybe certain cultures have been overtaken, overwhelmed by dominant cultures and languages. That's my answer.
And I think you can learn more if you listen to Getachew's video about the Battle of Adwa and the fact that Ethiopia was never colonized. So this is important to understand about Ethiopia, and I think that gives rise to what you're talking about. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Question for Helina. How has your art been influenced by other women-led movements in other countries such as Iran? Or any other countries?
My By Way of Revolution series, I'm looking at archives of resistance, and I'm working with libraries internationally. The last international archive that I've worked with was the South London's, Brixton's Black Cultural Archive. And wow, the similarities, but the differences, and the specificity, right? And so when I do this work, I work with, always in community, and I'm working with local activists and archivists. And so I usually hire a local activist to be my research assistant. And that empowers them, most importantly, because when I leave, the work needs to keep going, right? So if you're working in partnership and you have community sort of supporting the work goes on without you, because my job is to keep traveling and make this thing happen, right? At Sharjah for the biennial, amazing experience being in the Middle East for 2 weeks and working to do a live performance and also a 3-room exhibition for the biennial with the work that was very, I would say, in this performance we were doing an activation, a celebration with song and text, inspired by the memories of 3 African-American women artist activists who were part of our lineage. So I'm working with Abby Dobson and Erin Maya, who are New York City singers, and we come in and we're bringing in Bell Hooks energy, we're bringing in Toni Morrison energy, Nina Simone, and we're singing and activating, and I'm passing crowns to Middle Eastern women. Some of them are Black women who live in the Middle East, and the love that I got afterwards, because this one participant said, we don't really talk about race so much in the UAE. And so this was a chance for me to reconcile with that. And so for me, that's the most humbling thing and I love audiences of all types. I say this all the time, my favorite audience is under 10 years old. If they can get the work, if it's that accessible, I've done my job. Of course, I'll go and teach in my Ivy League school and try to use all big art jargon, but I'm really more interested in making it accessible. And if I can make it accessible across language barriers, that is something else that's exciting, because if I had a superpower, to quote one of my friends, Eileen Menesh, we always say this, if we had superpowers, we would speak every language possible. And then we can connect with everyone all over the planet. How powerful is that, right? But art can do that. Visual art can do that, because you don't need to know all the nuances. They didn't need to know who Nina Simone was to say, oh, you're celebrating women, and maybe they've done something, and maybe they're not alive, and maybe this is a way to commemorate. They got it. And so, to speak to the original question was how has my work been influenced by outside movements outside of the US and internationally? I'm always doing that work in the work, and I'm always learning. I'm a lifelong learner. I don't profess to know everything about every social justice issue in every place. And I always want to learn more and more about what's happening in contemporary day. And my students keep me fresh. My niece and my nephews keep me fresh. People around me, like, because eventually I will need to know and grow. And so that's how I would answer that.
Excellent. Thank you. Getachew, what is your hope for your legacy and for Helina's future and her generation's future?
For a legacy to persevere, to continue, we need to have a strong family. Family built by love and instilling in their children hard work, perseverance. And one thing I will also, maybe that also, Helina, don't listen to this might apply to you too. Let's not force our kids to be what they don't want to be. You have to be a lawyer, a medical doctor. So don't pressure the students, your kids. Growing up, we told Helina she wants to go to arts. Her mother specifically encouraged her. We believe that whatever you want to be that, but be the best one. So that's the thing. You can be a shoe shiner, but be the best, where you can get a lot of customers. For her legacy to continue, first of all, make sure that you are well embedded, well footed in your culture. Be positive in human beings. Human beings by nature are nice. Of course, there are some dark shapes in our societies, in our families. But working on those things, saying that, telling them that the future will be better, it will improve. My future, my situation is better than my parents. And my parents' situation was better than theirs. So you can be also better than me. But the important thing is, think collectively as well. Don't be individualistic. How we can collectively solve some of the overwhelming problems that we are facing: poverty, environmental degradation, racism, sexism. Maybe if we can instill all of those things, not hammering them to be what we want us to be. We want them to be. Let them be what they are, and let them be the best that they can be. I can say that. I think that probably has sufficed the question. Thank you.
Okay, one final question for Helina, if I could squeeze it in. What advice do you have for first-generation Ethiopians who want to center our culture and history in their work? Basically do what Helina does.
So the advice is for younger artists or creatives or people who are looking to integrate?
I think in any kind of work. I think
Yeah.
the person who asked this is in the culinary field, so any work.
Okay. Well, I think what I do is storytelling, but storytelling applies to a lot of different fields. And to make art, I was just telling this with a friend of mine who's not in the arts at all, and I was just talking about the differences with the arts. I have to go in really deep. Like, I have to keep going in. If it's surface, it doesn't work. My dad actually gave some studio visits to my students this summer at a residency, Atlantic Center for the Arts, which was amazing. And he was encouraging them the same thing. Go deeper into, what it is your inquiry is. Go deeper. This is true if anyone's gone to graduate school or, even in any school. It's like, you gotta find the essence of who you are so you can actually make the work. And being an artist and being creative is actually very vulnerable. Very vulnerable work. there's not the built-in protection, I would say. There is some, but there's not the built-in protection. You have to kind of be real with people. And I'm vulnerably sharing my family and my art and my community, and these are my, all of these things. So, but there's risk with that, but there's joy with that. I feel so fulfilled every day. I'm so grateful that I get to do this work, because at the essence, this is actually me being myself, right? And so my encouragement for anyone who wants to either go in the arts or do anything is really, you have to go deep into who you are. Take that journey, whatever that looks like for you, take that time and be unapologetically yourself. Don't worry about what it looks like. Don't worry about if people are going to. I was talking about healing scrolls and all kinds of stuff for a while, and there wasn't a show around it to really explain it, but I knew that there was something in there for me. And I just kept that going. And so that truth-telling, that storytelling, that courage, that is a very intimate relationship with self. And artists, we spend a lot of time alone in the studio or on the road, showing and doing all kinds of stuff, and there's a lot of labor. So my second advice is get some stamina. Do your push-ups, do something, and persevere, because doing your work, it's going to be hard no matter what your work is, no matter what your path is, but at least when the challenges come, you enjoy it. It's for you.
Good.
So we are very close to time, but I think that our audience would love to hear from both of you. How can they learn more about the work that you're doing moving forward?
Daddy.
They want to look you up.
Well, most of my writings in English can be found in Amazon, in the books. And I think that's the way it is these days. Mm-hmm. As a marketplace. Mm-hmm. And then, unfortunately, the Amharic writings of mine are not online. And I think that's going to be my big task for retirement. I can say that.
Don't retire yet, please. And Helina?
So, easy way is my website, just myname.com, social media, Helina.Metaferia on Instagram. And then exhibitions, upcoming exhibitions. So of course, Ethiopia, the Crossroads, you can actually see my work upstairs today, which is great. And that will be on a traveling show. And then I have some solo shows coming up at Center for Book Arts and Recess Art in May of this year, and then a concurrent solo show in San Francisco at YBCA and MOAD, and that's in October, in advance of the presidential election. So it's all about protests. All of these 4 shows are all about protests and archives and community building, and we've got work to do.
That's good.
So with that, I don't want to leave the stage because I'm having a wonderful time up here, and I'm sure you all are too. Thank you all for coming and being such a wonderful, engaged audience.
Can we just shout out our family really quick?
Yes,
and
of course,
friends?
yes.
If you are a member of this family, can you stand up just for a second? Because we have family up top, here as well, yes. Thank you for coming. And we also have folks from the church, and if you want to introduce
Yes,
them.
go ahead.
Yep.
Yeah.
And also wanted to acknowledge our local community that has shown up, including Dr. Abba Amara down in the front from St. Mary's Church in College Park. Very grateful. Anybody else you'd like to acknowledge?
From Club 17.
Oh yeah.
All right.
And
These are parents of the young generation.
And I will also say Morgan State. Is Morgan State in the house? Anybody from
All
Morgan?
right.
Stand up, raise your hand, do something. Hello. Who graduated from Morgan? Okay. We have Morgan community here. Thank you.
Members of our church, St. Mary. St. Mary. All right. All right. All right. Members of the human community.
And as a reminder, we are open today until 5 o'clock. Please go and enjoy the Ethiopia at the Crossroads exhibition. It is right out that top door there. You can take the elevator from down here to the first floor. We are selling Ethiopian coffee in our cafe. We have wonderful Habesha goods in our shop, including the Ethiopia catalog. And we also have the book that you were mentioning by your mom and your wife for sale at the check-in desk. Is that right?
Yes,
that's right.
at the check-in desk.
At the check-in desk. And I wanted to thank, of course, one more time, Helina Metaferia, Getachew Metaferia.